All right, welcome everyone. I think we've got the 12 o'clock flood in. So we'll get started here. Welcome to our MWEE practitioner webinar series. For those of you who I don't know, my name's Elise. I work for NOAA Chesapeake Bay office and excited to have you all here with us today. If you aren't familiar, this is part of a series that we host through the Chesapeake Bay Education Work Group and that we run through the winter months, usually on a monthly basis. Talking about kind of MWEEs and what they look like in a variety of different contexts. This winter, we have a number of our BWET grantees that are presenting and sharing about their work. And I'm really excited about Suzanne's going to share today with us a little bit about what it looks like in the elementary context. If you have ideas for topics that you'd like to see focused on a webinar, please reach out to me. Happy to use your ideas. If you have something that you'd like to share in this situation, please feel free to reach out, and I'll drop my email in the chat in a couple minutes here. But just to kind of kick us off, a couple housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded, and because of that, please keep your video camera off unless you consent to having your image potentially included in the recording. At the end, we will have time for discussions, and I'll just chop that off, and that way we can kind of engage without having that be a barrier. Like I said, the recording will be posted on the Bay Program's YouTube page. It's the MWEE Practitioner channel, and that usually happens in just a couple of weeks. I know that our last webinar is not up there yet, but it's coming soon. I did just drop in the link in the chat, so you can check out the more than 20 webinars that we have archived there, and more to come. Everything from developing authentic partnerships to accessing and using environmental data, you can find that on that link. We're going to pause for questions throughout. Suzanne's going to be having some interactive things that she'll be engaging with you through the chat, so feel free to be ready for that. And then I also wanted to just share that we have a number of other webinars planned for the rest of this winter, including one on February 22nd. We're having Virginia Commonwealth University. They'll be sharing about 2 modules that engage secondary students in the impact and importance of bivalves in their ecosystems. And then on March 22nd, we'll have a really unique partnership between 2 universities and 2 school districts and how they're working towards building capacity in pre-service teachers and in systemic sustained MWEEs. Really cool project. I will pop this link into the chat now. This is our ESTC, NOAA Environmental Science Training Center website. And this is where you can find and register for those webinars, as well as other workshops that we have going throughout this year. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Suzanne Sullivan from ShoreRivers to introduce herself and share a little bit about their BWET funded project.
Thanks so much, Elise and NOAA in the Chesapeake Bay program for having me. As Elise said, my name is Suzanne Sullivan. I'm the Director of Education for ShoreRivers, and I'm really excited to share with you my experiences delivering, planning, implementing our elementary school meaningful watershed education experience. I want to give myself a disclaimer. I'm going to say this. Do not judge me on the quality of my slides. I feel like everyone always asks environmental educators, oh, the winter must be a slow time for you. I am here to say it is not. So don't shame me for the lack of imagination in my slides moving forward. Just to give you a sense of who ShoreRivers is, where we are. We are located on the eastern shore of Maryland, also known as the Delmarva Peninsula, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia. And ShoreRivers is a riverkeeper organization. So that means we operate under an umbrella organization, the Waterkeeper Alliance. And that's actually not even just a regional, not even just national. It is a global organization. And in order to be considered or licensed as a Waterkeeper Alliance, you need to do 2 things. You need to collect water quality data, and you need to use that data in advocacy. Feel free to drop in the chat box if you have a river keeper, a bay keeper. I think there's even mountain keepers. If you know of a keeper in your region, please feel free to drop it in the chat box. Like I said, it's not only just regional to the Chesapeake Bay, it is a global organization. As you can see, ShoreRivers is really fortunate to have 4 riverkeepers on staff, and our riverkeepers work from the Sassafras River through the Chester, Miles Y, and Choptank rivers. So our organization serves all of those watershed communities through science-based. I wish I had the science-based, underlined, bolded, circled. We use that water quality data. We use that land data to inform the advocacy that we do on local, state, and national levels. We use that data to prioritize where restoration needs to happen in our communities, whether it's a rain garden in a community or whether it's a large-scale agricultural project to reduce pollution. And shout out to all the keepers. I see a mention of the Potomac. I see Anacostia, Nat with JRA, awesome. So glad to know that you all know of your local riverkeeper organizations. If you are doing a MWEE that needs data, they collect data. And then I have the awesome job of funneling all of our Shore Rivers mission and work through our education programs. So I'm actually going to stop sharing for a moment, and I'm going to let Elise share just because I haven't used Zoom in so long, but I always remembered the audio is annoying through screen sharing. So we're going to listen to about 2 minutes of video from Maryland Public Television. As we are watching this video, just know that at the end of it, I'm going to ask you to drop in the chat box for 1 minute as many questions that you can possibly generate from this video.
A spring breeze blows steady across the Nanticoke River. But biologist Chuck Stentz and his crew with the Maryland Department of Natural Resources ignore the cold. They're on the hunt for something prehistoric.
No sturgeon. We would love to find one Atlantic sturgeon just to prove that they're here, that the juveniles are here and that the adults had a successful spawning. It would be the first documented spawning population in Maryland.
With a gargantuan growth potential, up to 14 feet and 800 pounds, the bony-plated Atlantic sturgeon is a relic, a fish that shared ancient oceans with the dinosaurs. Once plentiful throughout the Chesapeake Bay region, sturgeon meat and eggs were an important food source for thousands of years. Historians believe it was sturgeon caught on the James River that in 1609 saved the Jamestown colony from famine and collapse. In the late 19th century, the fish was harvested up and down the East Coast for its eggs, caviar, a delicacy. But overfishing and habitat loss soon caught up with the bay's sturgeon, and the population was listed as endangered in 2012. And because they're dealing with a federally listed endangered species, Chuck and his crew have a special permit for their research. Strict guidelines govern their work.
Yeah, these are American eels.
So far, white perch, a couple.
And Elise, if you want to pause it there.
Choker.
Okay, so I am already seeing some questions. Some folks are direct messaging them. Some people are dropping them in the chat, but I have about 50 seconds on my timer. If you could please drop in the chat box as many questions that you can generate from that video. Take about 10 more seconds. Awesome. We can stop there. I hope that if you are not already a sturgeon fanatic, that this video has instantly got you hooked, pun intended. But this is an example of how not only do we generate student questioning, but the kind of excitement that sturgeon can elicit. So I actually want to give a shout out to Hema, who is in our learning community today. Hema is the science coordinator for Wacomico County in Maryland. And this is a technique, the question formulation technique, that Hema passed on to me. I watched her do it. And it's using a piece of evidence or a statement to generate student questioning. And then the next steps to this are you have your students prioritize the top 3 questions that they have all generated together. And oftentimes that generating of questions and then group prioritization of questions often leads to a roadmap for your own issue investigation. So I wanted to show this video just to give an example of how we actually do use this technique with 3rd grade students in our MWEE, but I also just thought it was a fantastic video that you can find on Maryland Public Television if you have your own sturgeon program. And I just want to reiterate to everyone, feel free to raise your hand. Elise and our other friends at NOAA are proctoring. So if you want to jump off mute and contribute to the conversation, if you want to drop a question in the chat box, they will let me know. But this is definitely not a wait till the end of the presentation. I wanted to give a brief overview of what our MWEE structure is. So our driving question, which I think some of you might have asked, how do human actions on land impact the habitat of endangered Atlantic sturgeon? I think you all might have asked some supporting questions that would lead to some of our investigations in our MWEE. But sturgeon habitat, they actually migrate. So they migrate from the oceans where they spend their adult lives. They migrate through the Chesapeake Bay up into our rivers where there is critical spawning habitat. They need rocky river bottom. They cannot spawn on silted over river bottom that's soft, mushy, muddy. The eggs will sink and they will not successfully reproduce. So our driving question is, how do our actions on land impact that reproductive habitat that is so critical to their survival? The outdoor field experiences that we use in this MWEE, students collect water quality data. At the 3rd grade level, we have focused on turbidity. At the high school level, you might be looking at oxygen, you might be looking at salinity, you might be looking at pH and nitrate, but we've really learned that for our 3rd grade level, tied to the idea of sturgeon spawning habitat, turbidity, and how any sediment floating in the water eventually silts over the sturgeon habitat, that's our piece of data that we look at. We also conduct biological surveys by seine netting so students can understand, is there actually enough prey in this river that sturgeon want to eat? And then we visit schoolyards and we do a schoolyard site assessment to compare what's happening on land in their own community between what we found in the water and making connections between the two. We have a sturgeon scientist notebook that we use for conclusions and synthesis throughout this MWEE. So this is a notebook that we created with some NOAA fisheries inspiration that I'll get to down the line. But this is a book that we created and printed with our NOAA BWET funds. And it is so critical to leaving time and space for student questioning, keeping track of the data that students collected, and leaving space for them to make conclusions through activities and model different types of action. And then, I can't tell you what the action projects are yet because it's student-led, but when we get down the line, you'll see some of the ones that we've come up with over the years. Just to give you a sense again, our district partners are Talbot County Public Schools and Dorchester County Public Schools. You might be from a much bigger district, so just want to set the scene that these are 13 elementary schools, you know, a little over 600 students, which gives us a very manageable number of schools to complete a full MWEE with. So that is a pro. But one of the cons in our rural school districts is that oftentimes school teachers are actually playing, and school administrators are 5 different roles in one. So you might be the science coordinator, but your school also doesn't have a grant writer on staff. So you do that too. You might be the science coordinator and grant writer, but you're also the athletic director for sports after school. So even though this number is nice and manageable, there are other challenges that come with working in these smaller school districts. A lot of our schools are actually Title I schools, and I just wanted to give you a sense of the students that we see. Talbot County is a primarily white school with a growing number of Hispanic students, which played into how we communicate some of our programming. And then Dorchester County Schools is actually a majority of students who identify as Black. So just to give a sense that these, even though they're right next to each other, these school systems are unique and we treat them as such. A shout out to the partners. I think NOAA and the Chesapeake Bay program has shown a spotlight on the importance of networks in creating something sustainable. And we have an extremely strong network of partners who makes this possible for us. So the first partner to highlight, who you saw in the video, Maryland Department of Natural Resources. This is our state agency, and they provide the local relevance to this issue. I think students and teachers buy in more when they know this is an active investigation. We don't have all the data. We don't have all the information about sturgeon populations. So students and teachers get excited to think that they are contributing to something where we don't have the answers, and it's not like a staged investigation. This is really ongoing. Maryland DNR provides the real tracking data. So they have buoys throughout the Atlantic Ocean from Maine to Florida and then up into our rivers. There's a system of these state agencies and national agencies working together. But that means there are pages and pages of tracking data that I don't want to look at. I don't understand it. So DNR summarizes that data for us. And actually NOAA has, I'll get to that in a minute, NOAA has a coordinator who can provide your students with summarized tracking data. Maryland Department of Natural Resources has come to most of our teacher professional developments every year, and they're the experts who get our teachers excited, again, that this is relevant. And then they're there to answer any in-depth questions. And then we benefit Maryland DNR because we have outreach metrics that they need to meet for some of their grants. So we can report to them how many students their program information went to. And then NOAA Fisheries has scoots. You know, when just like an acronym works out so perfectly, I've never gotten to that level. But this one, to me, I'm like, this is the mother of all acronyms working in the best way possible. Students collaborating to undertake tracking efforts for sturgeon. So scoots are the bony plates that run down the sturgeon's back. So this is a program where right now you can Google NOAA Fisheries Scoots, and you can find an entire web page devoted to activities that already exist around sturgeon. They are an endangered species, or the Atlantic sturgeon are endangered. So if you do an endangered species day at your school or in your curriculum, it can also connect there. But talk about not reinventing the wheel. A lot of the foundation for the things that we incorporated in our MWEE were inspired by Scoot's curriculum. Another partner critical to making this grant happen is the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. So this is a network, UMCs, UMCES has multiple campuses across Maryland, but we visit the Horn Point campus on Maryland's Eastern Shore, which is also home to the largest oyster hatchery for restoration on the East Coast. I would give a big hoorah to this, that if you run a summer program, if you travel with students, this is not our facility. We rent it, which means you can rent it too. So I wonder if I can get my little pointer. I shouldn't touch it. I should not touch the screen, but I wanted to show you. How do I go back?
We can see your clicker, Suzanne.
Okay. I tell you, I've been using Google Meets way too long. So some of the features of this campus here is the oyster hatchery and science lab, where billions of baby oysters are being grown to be put back into the Chesapeake Bay. But this is also where real live endangered sturgeon are housed for our students to see, this lab building over here. Over here are more oceanography labs. If you pass through here, there is an environmental education center that you can rent. It has 2 dorm rooms that I think in total can house 70 people, 35 and 35 each. There's a large conference room kitchen area. There's wet labs. And then you can walk through these forested trails. Right down here is a canoe shed, and it could be blowing on the main stem of the chop tank, and this sheltered cove could still be nice and clear to take students out canoeing. So just to give you a sense, this is where we do our field trips. And if you ever have a group that needs to travel or find lodging, UMCs can be rented. And then just want to give a shout out to them because they house the Atlantic sturgeon for us that were not taken from the wild. These were hatchery raised in Canada, but they can never be re-released. And because they are an endangered species, a very specific permit is needed to house them and take care of them. So our partners here, because they do that research anyways, they get the permit for us. And that scientist is Dr. Lewis Plow, and he is actually using DNA. And a current project is looking at the stomach contents of invasive blue catfish to see if DNA of sturgeon can be found in the stomach to see are this invasive fish eating sturgeon. So a lot of cool stuff happening here, but they are a very critical partner. I chose this photo because this man looked like he was up for a challenge. So again, this is a 3rd grade meaningful watershed education experience that we partner with these 2 school districts. And we had 1 year of a Chesapeake Bay Trust grant with Talbot County to pilot this program. And it really started by me going to these school districts and saying, where do you have gaps? And they showed us that there was no environmental programming in 3rd grade. And we looked at the 3rd grade units that included concepts like migration, adaptations, fossils, and the pieces fell into place that sturgeon encompass all of that. So I did not wake up one morning and think, I want a sturgeon program. We met with our local counties and found out where they had gaps, what their curriculum was, and what could meet those needs. So that was originally funded by the Chesapeake Bay Trust for 1 year. And then we received a NOAA BWEC grant for 3 years. COVID hit, and then we got a no cost extension. So we didn't add money. We just extended our grant for a 4th year, which we are currently closing out at the end of this semester. Working with elementary, some of the things that I have come up against is that there is not enough time for science, especially in the COVID world. We were told that math and science, or math and reading and writing, were a priority. And then action projects seem to be really intimidating at an elementary level. And then more so than in high schools, we experienced a lot of teachers changing grade bands within the elementary system. So we would find out that a teacher we made an incredible relationship with 1 year was now going to be a 5th grade teacher the next year. I will never claim to be an expert in anything. I think you all are as well. So if anyone wants to unmute themselves or drop in the chat box a challenge that they face at the elementary level when delivering or planning MWEEs.
And feel free to use the raise your hand option if you want to come off mute, or feel free to type in the chat.
Yeah, we've had a lot of I saw teacher retention. We have had a lot of teacher turnover in our counties as well. If you want to drop in the chat box, I would be interested in hearing huge school districts. Yeah, absolutely. Baby steps. I would say if you want to drop in the chat box one of these that resonates with you the most. Oops. So the first challenge that I want to tackle or share some insight in is we were told there's never enough time for science. Some of our partners told us that they get 20 minutes if they're lucky, sometimes daily, or 20 minutes for the week. Again, coming off of COVID, writing, reading, and math were absolutely prioritized at the detriment of arts, science, and things of that nature. So we had to tackle this a lot. And the key to this was interdisciplinary MWEEs. And I think one of the things that shifted in our brains from the beginning to present day is when we planned this MWEE with the school system, all of us were looking at it with the assumption that this was going to happen during science time. We definitely threw out like, oh, cool, this is so interdisciplinary. But from the beginning, we were sort of picking on science to say it will happen at this time period, it will happen in this unit, instead of looking at the bigger picture from the start. So one insight, instead of just marketing interdisciplinary, build it as such. So I just wanted to highlight some of the third grade standards that Maryland has that we have really incorporated and have given us more time for this MWEE investigation during math class. So there's a standard that looks at creating graphs, particularly at third grade. Pictographs and bar graphs are really a tool that they practice using. So we took some of our sturgeon data and made sure that we delivered it in those pictographs. So when kids go seine netting, they make pictographs to compare how many of what different animals they saw. They make bar graphs to show as sturgeon grow older, they actually lay more eggs. And then we had an experiment where students try feeding like different types of fish, and then they analyze that data in another bar graph. There is another Maryland standard to measure liquid volumes using certain units. So for us, that really meant we look at stormwater as a transport for what brings the pollution into the sturgeon's aquatic habitat. So for us, that liquid measurement came in the form of rain gauges and then turbidity tubes. So again, instead of thinking, okay, we need to make time in your science unit to measure turbidity, flipping it to when can you make time in your math unit to measure turbidity or to measure the stormwater. Even that slight change of how we were framing or requesting time totally changed our way of thinking that this was only a science project. And then and we really didn't sit down in the planning process and think math, but so much of the data that students collect is directly tied to math standards. So students look at tables, they measure themselves against an adult sturgeon, because you heard the fact they can grow to be 14 feet long. That is so incredible. So much of this MWEE actually happens during math time. And then, yes, I fully agree, Michelle. There is no such thing as only a science project. And if we can just start framing and using that language from the beginning, I think things will be easier. And then so much of this was driven by the teachers midway through the program. So halfway through the program, one of our teachers came to us and said, there's a writing standard around persuasive arguments, and students have to generate supporting arguments. They have to show evidence. So this persuasive argument is actually, again, students write it in our sturgeon notebooks, but it is a writing prompt or a writing standard that teachers have to meet. And then some other areas that weren't necessarily tied to curriculum, but was something that schools already did. In their life cycle unit, they make dioramas. And then a simple addition was just adding sturgeon as one of the options of animals that students could choose from. So the more that teachers thought about things that they already do, and how talking about a sturgeon instead of talking about a crab like they traditionally do could make this more integrated. And then social studies. So sturgeon being living dinosaurs, we have a ton of history with them. There's a ton of history with indigenous people around sturgeon as well. But I would not have found these primary sources without the help of our local university. So I would encourage you to reach out if you have a university or a college system in your area. Often their library has local archives. So this image is from the Nanticoke, a town near the Nanticoke River, where our students live around. That's where our Maryland Department of Natural Resources fishes for the sturgeon. This was a postcard that was created and sent by one of those towns during the early 1900s. This newspaper article, if your eyesight is incredible, was written, I think it says 1905. And this right here, you can see under the title Nanticoke, is an excerpt describing how a fisherman caught sturgeon and where he sells them. So many connections to social studies, but I would never, ever have found these things just Googling sturgeon images. These came from local archives. So if anyone has any suggestions for other places to find primary resources, please drop them in the chat box. But my hint would be your local university's library. And action projects. We know they are intimidating, and over time, we have definitely not perfected this by any means. So again, I love to hear your insight on action projects, but from the beginning, making sure that the word age appropriate is in the discussion. And the way that we have helped to define what is age appropriate for a third grader is using standards and frameworks that are interdisciplinary. I'll expand more on that. And then reminding, again, at the elementary level, you're just starting to learn how to read. You're just starting to learn how to write. But one thing that you can do is you can do art. So the other key that we have found working with elementary school is art as advocacy, awareness, and action. So again, trying to define what is age appropriate for a third grader, we looked to the Maryland civic standards. So I think, again, one of the fears is that this is a tack on, or that a MWEE is just another addition. But in Maryland third grade classrooms, I know that there is a unit around civics, and I know that they must address a local issue by explaining the importance of this issue in their community, examining the issue on a local or state level, trying to influence local, state, or national governments to address the issue. So I know this is going on. So again, making sure that we as education providers study up and learn those other standards. I will totally admit, as an environmental educator, it took me a long time to even Google math standards or Common Core math. An embarrassing long time, but once I have, I now have a better understanding of how to demystify action and data collection. So again, I would ask, what are your school districts already doing, or what are your teachers already doing to meet those existing standards? And can the subject area be swapped to whatever your MWEE issue is? Maybe the answer is yes, maybe it's no, but it's one avenue. And then Maryland has a framework, which is even better. So there's examples of how the civics can fit in reading, in writing, in speaking and listening. So right in front of you, you have a menu of action options that are embedded, again, in a framework that already must happen and already exists. Here is an example. I will admit this one happened outside of third grade because sturgeon are straight up addicting. And once the third grade teachers started talking about sturgeon, all of a sudden we had sixth grade teachers asking us about sturgeon. But this is an example of one of those civic writing prompts. We, as ShoreRivers, were advocating against the building of a salmon farm on the Nanticoke River. The salmon farm, even though in general we support aquaculture, the salmon farm was a 25-acre indoor facility. So that's 25 acres of impervious surface that was actually going to run off into the headwaters. And it was going to be, I think, 17 billion gallons of water daily. And if you think I'm making these numbers up, the billions really were the true numbers daily going into the sturgeon habitat. And there was no science or effort to look into how would this impact sturgeon spawning habitat. And this spawning habitat wasn't protected because NOAA or DNR couldn't get a boat underneath the bridge to map this critical habitat. So simply because they couldn't get a boat up there, it wasn't protected on a map. So students went out of their way, along with the community, to write to Maryland Department of Environment to say, please do not issue the permit for the salmon farm until there is more information about how this will impact their spawning grounds. So everything that we just saw in the last reading and writing prompts were available to students through this project. Speaking and listening, they could have attended one of the sessions or town councils to speak at it as well. The salmon farm permit, or the salmon farm, was a Norwegian company. They heard the cry from the people and they pulled the permit request themselves because I think they heard what the people wanted, which was an awesome win and doesn't happen often. So we got to celebrate our wins when we have them. And a reminder that demystifying action can also come through the lens of art. Art, again, is something that is often known and beloved in elementary schools. Art teachers are always extremely willing to be collaborative, especially at the elementary level that we found. But I also want to emphasize your local arts councils. So we know and understand that your art teachers are also probably swamped because your school already sees them as a resource. So we emailed our local Dorchester Council for the Arts, and we asked, we are trying to generate a student mural about the sturgeon. Could you recommend an artist to help us turn the mural into a reality? So you can see these super realistic fish are actually the students' drawings themselves, because again, it was really important to us and thankfully the artist that the youth voice and the youth action was actually authentic. So I cannot tell you exactly what fish this is, but I know that a student envisioned it along with their students, or a student envisioned it in this unit of Chesapeake Bay, and they envisioned it swimming next to a sturgeon. So we took student artwork, and the local artist, Shelton Hawkins, is the one who laid out those templates on the wall. And then he did the sturgeon himself. And then the students painted in this mural. It was such a cool experience. And now this gets to live on as a teaching tool in Choptank Elementary School. And Michelle, you're right. I think it is important to realize that, like I mentioned before too, arts and science have both taken hits in our school budgets. And I'm glad you said that, because the money, in addition to our BWEC grant, the money to pay for this came from a local arts council grant. So oftentimes your local arts council might have mini grants. Generally in our community, it's $500 to $1,000. So we didn't quite budget for a mural in our BWEC grant. So we supplemented that with funding from this arts council. Clearly, we love murals. This was another mural from our pilot year that was funded by the Chesapeake Bay Trust. Students wanted to create a mural. These students really got obsessed with the idea of migration and how many thousands of miles the sturgeons traveled. So they wanted to be able to replicate that on their recently laid blacktop. So again, we fully partnered with the Talbot County Arts Council, and we said, can you help us find an artist that would be able to lay down a template of the Chesapeake Bay? So now not only is this an awareness tool, but students, we get to use it when we do lessons in the next MWEE years, which is really cool. And we understand that teachers change roles frequently at the elementary level. Like I said, we might have a teacher who is with us for third grade, has been so bought in, has been a driver of this program for their colleagues, and then next year they're in fifth grade. We've just embraced it. So what has been really successful to us is using professional developments to invite those previous teachers, invite those previous motivated teachers to share their experiences, act like a mentor to the new teachers. And then, like I said, some teachers, if they are sturgeon addicts now, they have carried the learning into different grade bands. And this program has been going on for 4 years in Talbot County. So we've actually started to see teachers build on it themselves, which is pretty cool. But I would say from the beginning, if you are planning your BWET budget, or maybe you didn't get as many teachers as you thought to your PD, invite everyone. Invite the math teacher, invite the arts teacher, and try and form those cross-curricular connections during the summer so they can play out in the school year. In summary, interdisciplinary from the start. Don't just sell this as a science MWEE. If you can work with the school to convince them that the data collection is going to happen during their math period and it's going to connect because of these standards, you might have less trouble trying to schedule visits or trying to make sure that your content is hit during the year. Civics plus arts has been a gateway to age appropriate action for us. It's been a way for teachers to build confidence in understanding the process of guiding action. And then we've seen them really take hold of it in the following years. And then keep previous teachers in the loop if their position changes. Can you pay them to be a mentor or an advisor to a new teacher? Can you pay them a stipend to join the summer PD and contribute from their curriculum perspective? And then just some other pieces that have really helped us. Printing a MWEE specific journal has really helped with student recall, because our MWEE is spread out through so many units. The journal is a way for them to track that information, go back at it. It's a way for them to, and us, to make space for student questioning. And they really love the notebook. We definitely have teachers that in summer PDs, they've said, I am not really very environmental. And then they are the ones sending me sturgeon t-shirts that they found on Amazon. I kid you not. And honestly, that has just been us taking time to hear what their interests are. It could be art, it could be music, it could be math, and trying to find a way to pivot what we're doing to incorporate that. And
Suzanne.
I think yeah, go ahead.
Oh, we just had a question come in the chat related to the student journals. And just like logistically, do you all find it more helpful to kind of hold those journals between visits, or do the teachers hold on to them and have their students working on them while ShoreRivers isn't in the classroom?
I would give them a milk crate when you hand over the journals, and our teachers have kept them in the classroom because our journals are built with some of the scoots. Has the NOAA website already had some pre-made like coloring activities that when students finished earlier than others, that was built in for them to carry on or do another activity. So they leave them in the classroom in a milk crate and hand them out when we come. Teachers who haven't done that, the kids lose them immediately. So if teachers are going to house them in the classroom, don't leave them to the students. Make sure that they collect them and distribute them and recollect them, or else you're going to need to print a lot of extra workbooks. That was a good question. So like I said, I'm definitely not an elementary expert. So I would love to hear from you all, especially at the elementary level, where you have some successes. And that Kirsten, just to add to that, we don't have them bring their notebooks to the field trip for that reason. We have whiteboards that students write the data on. We take a photo every single day, so it's work on our part, but we take a photo of that whiteboard, email it to the teacher, and then the students transfer that information to their notebooks. And yes, I've forgotten to take a photo. So yes, I have fudged data before, but I have used a previous classes. So yeah, it's a little more work and effort on our part, but it doesn't make sense for kids to bring their paper journal seine netting.
Suzanne, is this a good time for like just general questions? Okay, awesome. I'm gonna stop the recording now.